It started out as just another quiet evening. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. I was holed up in my room, stretched out on my bed, flipping through channels on the TV. Downstairs, I could hear the faint clatter of pots and pans. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner. My door was shut, as always. I liked my privacy. Needed it, really. My room had one peculiar feature that had always unnerved me. It connected directly to the attic. The room wasn't originally meant to be a bedroom, but since I was one of 4 kids, space was tight and the house had to adapt. So they converted it. And that meant the attic entrance, the kind with the pull-down ladder, hung ominously in the ceiling corner, right above my bed. Because of that setup, I was no stranger to noises above me. The occasional creaks and cracks from the attic had become something like background noise. I told myself it was just the weight of old boxes, bulky things filled with forgotten junk resting on those aging beams, pushing against the ceiling. It made sense. At least, it used to. But that night, I heard a crack, one unlike any I'd heard before. It was loud, violently loud. It tore through the quiet and made me jolt upright, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't just a settling noise. It wasn't the house creaking under pressure. It sounded like something shifted, something heavy, something deliberate. For a brief moment, I stared up at the attic door, half expecting it to start opening on its own. My instinct screamed at me to grab the cord, pull the ladder down, and check. But I didn't. I told myself it was nothing, just the same old pressure from the boxes. And maybe I was just too afraid to find out otherwise. That attic had always scared me. Ever since I was little, it gave me this deep, crawling unease. And now that it was connected directly to my room, that discomfort had only gotten worse. Later, over dinner, I brought it up to my mom. I tried to sound casual, but I'm sure she noticed the tension in my voice. I told her about the crack, how unusually loud it was, and admitted that it scared me. She looked up from her plate, gave a soft smile, and waved it off. "There's nothing up there but boxes, old junk, and maybe a few mice," she said. Then she added a light chuckle, her smile widening. "Okay, probably not even the mice," she teased, trying to ease my nerves. But the thing is, even with her reassurance, something about that noise still sat heavy with me, like it wasn't over. The rest of the night slipped by quietly after dinner. I stayed in my room, just like before, TV on, game controller in hand, trying to keep myself distracted. Even after the house went still and everyone else had gone to bed, I stayed up. Lost in the flickering colors of the screen and the quiet hum of digital worlds, I kept playing deep into the night. I made sure to turn the volume down low, barely audible, because in that house the walls were practically paper thin. Every creak, every whisper could be heard from room to room. The last thing I wanted was for someone to wake up. Then I heard it. Another crack from above. Not as loud or violent as the one earlier, but still sharp, deliberate, and out of place. It made me stop mid-game, fingers frozen on the controller, ears straining in the silence that followed. Nothing, just stillness. But the adrenaline had already started to creep in again, that cold tingle in the chest, that subtle but urgent need to know. So I stood up, crossed the room, and dragged over the small stepladder we kept tucked against the wall. My hands were shaking just a little as I reached for the cord and tugged the attic door down. The wooden steps unfolded with a soft creak, brushing the carpet like a slow exhale. There was no light up there. There never had been. If you wanted to look around, you had to bring your own flashlight and hope its beam was enough. I didn't climb in, not fully. I just stepped up high enough to peek my head through the dark opening. The air was stale, dry. It had that heavy attic smell, dust, insulation, and forgotten things. My flashlight cut through the dark in a narrow beam, sweeping across cardboard boxes, stacks of old furniture, loose blankets draped over God knows what. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, just piles and piles of the same clutter we'd always known was up there.
So maybe it really was just a box settling. Maybe something shifted its weight just right to cause the noise. That explanation felt a little flimsy, but it was enough for now. Enough to make me feel a flicker of relief. I climbed back down, folded the steps back up, and let the attic door click shut. I even made a mental note to tell Mom we should check it out properly in the morning, just to be sure. For the time being, I let the tension slide off me. I returned to my game and played for another hour, letting the soft glow of the screen soothe me. Eventually, I powered everything down. The room fell into silence again, broken only by the quiet hum of the house at night. I finally decided to get some sleep. But then, sometime after I'd finally slipped beneath the covers, I heard it again. Only this time, it wasn't the familiar creaks and groans of an old attic under pressure. No, these sounds were heavier, rhythmic, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. They came in steady intervals, echoing faintly through the ceiling above me. They weren't just random noises. These were footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps that moved across the attic floorboards, tracing a path from one end to the other. My body froze under the blanket, heart thudding wildly in my chest, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the sounds didn't stop. They kept coming, kept moving, kept growing louder. Then, suddenly, they stopped, right above the attic door, and everything went still. I stared up at that square outline in the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. It was like the air in the room had turned thick, heavy. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. I just kept staring, waiting, praying that it would end there. But it didn't. The attic door began to rise, slowly, silently, as if someone, something, was pushing it up from inside. It didn't feel real. Even though part of me had expected something to happen, I wasn't prepared to see it. For a split second, I just sat there, paralyzed. But instinct finally kicked in, and I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could. My feet barely touched the floor as I crept across the room and into the hallway, heart racing. I didn't even dare to look back. I tiptoed into my mom's room, gently shook her awake, and tried to explain what I'd seen. Her face shifted instantly, confusion turning to concern. Without hesitation, she nudged me to stay in her room while she got up to get my brothers. I sat on the edge of her bed, still listening, my ears tuned to every creak of the house, every breath of wind through the siding. And then, chaos. From the direction of my room came the sudden sound of shouting, my brothers' voices, raised and aggressive, followed by my mom's voice, panicked and sharp, yelling at them to get over here now. I could barely breathe. When they returned, I learned what happened. My two older brothers had gone up into the attic. My mom had heard the same noises too, but she hadn't wanted to admit it to herself until I came to her with the attic door opening on its own. But whoever, or whatever, had been up there was gone. The attic was empty, or so it appeared. They checked every corner, every box. Nothing. No sign that anything or anyone had been there at all. After that night, the strange noises stopped. At least, mostly. I still heard the occasional crack or soft thud from above, but they were the kind I was used to, the kind I could ignore. But I never looked at that attic door the same way again. For a short stretch of time, I rented a small single-family house in a quiet town near my job. It wasn't meant to be permanent, just a temporary setup while I figured things out. A few months at most, that was the plan. Nothing long-term. The place was decent enough. A little outdated, a little too quiet, but it served its purpose. The only real issue was the landlord. He was strange. Not outwardly hostile, but there was something off about him, hard to pin down. Conversations with him always felt awkward, like he was holding something back, or like he was constantly sizing you up without blinking. It didn't exactly make settling in easy. It was my first week living there, and since it was just me, I didn't need a whole lot of space. I stored most of my stuff in the garage, the spare room, or the closets. There wasn't much else in the way of storage, but I made it work. The house did have an attic though I never really gave it much thought. I didn't have enough stuff to justify going up there, and I'd always been the type to avoid dark, dusty crawl spaces if I could help it. Still, one afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd at least take a look, just to see how much space was up there. Who knows, maybe it could be useful for something. I grabbed a chair, reached up, and tugged at the attic door's pull cord. It didn't budge. Frowning, I pulled a little harder, thinking maybe it was stuck from age or paint. But again, nothing. That's when I noticed it. A small, almost hidden padlock securing the attic door shut. It was strange. I hadn't been given any key for that, and it definitely hadn't been mentioned in the lease. The next day, I called the landlord to ask about it. I kept it casual, just said I'd noticed the attic was locked and wondered if I could get the key, maybe to store a few light things or just check it out. His response was quick, flat. "The attic's off limits," he said. "It's not part of your rental agreement. It's locked for a reason." There was a pause on the line, like he was waiting to see how I'd respond. I didn't know what to say. "I wasn't told that," I replied. "Is that even legal? I mean, it's not included in the price you're paying," he cut in, his tone firm. "That's the agreement." I hesitated. Technically, I didn't know if he could legally block off part of the house like that, but I was getting the place for a good price, probably better than I could have found elsewhere in that area. And honestly, I didn't want to rock the boat. Not yet, not over an attic. So I let it go. For now. The next morning started like any other. I shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, and opened the fridge to grab some milk. Then I reached up into the cabinet for the cereal, a simple routine. But as I twisted off the cap of the milk carton, I paused. It felt lighter than I remembered. I tilted it slightly, listening to the soft slosh inside. There was definitely less milk than I expected. I stood there for a second, frowning at it, trying to recall if I'd poured a second glass the night before. Maybe a late-night trip to the kitchen? But I had no memory of it. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just tired and forgetting things. It wasn't worth stressing over a few ounces of milk.
The following morning, everything seemed normal again, at least at first. I made my breakfast, cleaned up, and went about my usual routine. But by lunchtime, I noticed something else. Some of my cold cuts were missing. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to notice. A few slices gone from the package, and I knew I hadn't touched them yet that day. I stood at the fridge with the door open, staring blankly inside, my mind slowly circling one thought. Was I losing it? I tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. It wasn't just the milk or the meat. It was the way it kept happening, day after day. Small things, subtle, just enough to make me question myself. I hadn't lived in the house long, but things already felt off. Off in a way that was hard to explain to anyone without sounding crazy. Still, I couldn't ignore the pattern. Food didn't just vanish, not like that. By that evening, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through the Best Buy website, looking up home camera systems. I wasn't ready to make a purchase yet, but I wanted to know what my options were. Something wasn't right, and I needed to find out what it was. If not for peace of mind, then at least to rule out anything weird. Eventually, I closed my laptop and went to bed, still thinking about it. I didn't expect to wake up in the middle of the night, but I did. It was around 4 a.m., pitch black outside, and I had to pee badly. I tried to ignore it at first, pulling the blanket tighter and shutting my eyes, hoping the urge would go away. It didn't. With a groan, I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. Still drowsy, still a little irritated, I made my way out into the hallway toward the bathroom. And that's when I saw it. Just ahead, barely visible in the low light, was the attic door, and something about it made me stop. I rubbed my eyes, once, twice, but it didn't change what I was seeing. The attic door was open. Not cracked, not loose, open. Hanging down from the ceiling, the wooden ladder fully extended, casting faint shadows across the hallway floor. My blood turned cold. My brain scrambled for an explanation, anything that made sense. Maybe the lock had broken? Maybe I hadn't noticed it before? But none of those things added up. All that kept echoing in my mind, over and over, was the same thought. What the fuck? The attic door was wide open, and the pull-down ladder stretched all the way to the floor, like it was inviting me up. My heart was hammering in my chest, but something inside me knew I had to look. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see what was up there. I turned around, went back into my room, and grabbed the heaviest duty flashlight I owned. A powerful industrial one I usually kept for storms or power outages. It had a solid weight in my hand, comforting in a small way. I flicked it on, and a bright white beam cut through the darkness. I stepped up onto the ladder, my footfalls echoing against the wood as I climbed. Every creak sounded deafening in the silence. As soon as my head cleared the attic floor, I swept the beam across the space and instantly froze. The flashlight was bright, so bright it lit up a massive portion of the attic at once. And that's when I saw it. The attic was much bigger than I ever imagined, way too big for a house of this size.
The layout didn't even make sense. It felt like it went on farther than the house should allow. But that wasn't what shook me. In the far corner of the attic, tucked behind a low beam, was a twin bed. An actual, made-up bed. Beside it sat a laundry hamper, half full of clothes. And scattered across the attic floor, piled in corners, hanging from nails, draped over boxes, were more clothes. Some folded, some crumpled, some definitely worn. This wasn't storage. This was living space. Someone had been staying up here. My throat went dry and my hands were slick with sweat as I turned slowly, sweeping the light toward the opposite wall. That's when I saw something that made my skin crawl. A TV was mounted to the wall, crudely, with visible screws and dangling wires, and on its screen was a live feed of my bedroom. My bedroom. The angle showed the entire room, my bed, my desk, the door, everything. It was a perfect view, like a security cam. But it wasn't one I ever installed. I hadn't even noticed the TV was on until now. Maybe because my flashlight had been overpowering any light coming from the screen. But once I saw it, everything clicked at once. I wasn't alone in that house. I never had been. Panic seized my chest. My pulse roared in my ears. I had to get out, now. I turned to head back toward the ladder, but stopped cold. Someone was at the entrance. At first, I could only see a head rising slowly through the opening. The rest of the body followed, inch by inch, until they were fully in the attic, crawling toward me. The flashlight trembled in my grip as I backed away, breath catching in my throat. And then I saw the face. It was the landlord. His expression was empty, hollow. His face held no tension, no recognition, just a pale, emotionless stillness. The kind of blankness that felt wrong, that felt inhuman. He crawled toward me slowly, elbows dragging across the attic floor like he'd done it 100 times before. His eyes locked onto mine, and then they widened. Not in surprise, not in fear. In something else. Something unsettling. He lifted one finger to his lips. Shh. He didn't speak any actual words, just made the sound, low and deliberate, over and over. Shh. His wide eyes didn't blink. His hand stayed pressed to his mouth as he crept closer, repeating that single breathy sound like it was the only thing keeping him calm. Shh. That moment is burned into my memory. The stillness of his face, the sound of his palms sliding across the wood, that sound. It was a miracle I reacted in time. Just before he reached me, I darted around him, heart slamming in my chest, vision narrowing with panic. I dropped down the ladder 2 steps at a time, landed hard on the floor below, and without hesitating, I shoved the ladder back up with all the strength I had. The attic door snapped shut. I didn't even wait to hear if he was following. I tore into my bedroom, grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and bolted for the front door, flinging it open so fast it slammed against the wall behind me. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. My fingers fumbled as I called the police, breathless and shaking. I gave them the address, told them everything I could manage through the panic. When they arrived, the house was quiet again. The attic was shut, and the landlord was gone. But I had all of his information, his full name, phone number, even the leasing documents. That was enough. He was found the next day at his brother's place in a nearby rundown town, holed up like nothing had happened. 2 days later, I was gone. I moved into a small apartment across town. And I don't care how good a deal might be, how charming the house might look on the outside. When I'm ready to buy a home of my own, I know one thing for sure. I'm never getting a house with an attic. When I was little, my brother, sister, and I had this tradition. Whenever we were home alone, we played hide and seek. It wasn't just a game. It made us feel like we had total control of the house. No parents, no rules. Every room, every hallway, every shadowy corner suddenly became part of our playground. We had our own system. One person would be the seeker, and the other two would hide. The first person found would lose that round. But if the seeker didn't find either of the hiders within 5 minutes, they lost the round. First to 3 points won the whole thing. It was simple, but serious. We kept score like our lives depended on it. I lost the first round that day. Still don't know why that stuck with me all these years, but it did. We were on the second round now. I was hiding again, and my sister was the seeker. My brother and I split off from the living room, our usual starting room, and took off in different directions. But I already knew exactly where I was going. The attic. It was the perfect hiding spot, a place none of us had ever thought to use before. It was always too dusty, too dark, too creepy. But that made it even better, because who would think to check up there? Maybe this could be my new go-to spot. Maybe I could dominate the rest of the game with this. The attic in our house wasn't one of those open spaces with a pull-down ladder. Ours was different. It was more like a storage crawl space attached to a big closet in the hallway. No ladder, no lights, just a low opening you had to push yourself through. Most of the time, we ignored it completely. But not today. I climbed inside, shut the attic door behind me as quietly as I could, and took a moment to let my eyes adjust to the pitch black. It was like being swallowed whole. I moved forward slowly, crouched low, trying not to bump into anything. My hands stretched out in front of me, feeling for the familiar shapes of storage bins, boxes, old bags. I made it about halfway through when I found it. A cardboard box and a big black trash bag stuffed with something soft. Perfect. I slid behind them and curled up into the shadows, trying not to make a sound. Now I wait, I thought to myself, settling into the stillness. And in that silence, so deep I could hear my own heartbeat, something about that attic suddenly felt a little too quiet. There's something oddly peaceful about sitting in a pitch-black space, doing absolutely nothing, when it's part of a game like hide and seek. Somehow, that darkness didn't feel boring. It felt thrilling, like I was part of something secret and clever. But that thrill didn't come without its cost. The entire time, I felt on edge, too rushed, too alert. My ears strained for any creak, any sudden movement. At any moment, I expected to hear the attic door creak open and my sister come scrambling in, laughing and yelling that she found me. I kept mentally tracking the time, not exact seconds, but a vague estimate. My body was so tense I could practically feel every minute pass. I didn't dare take out my timer to check. The screen would be too bright in this total darkness. I figured 4 minutes had passed, just one more to go. Then I could call it. Then I'd be safe. But just as I started to relax a little, I heard something. Crunch. It was the unmistakable sound of a plastic bag being crumpled. I froze. Wait, had someone come in here without me noticing? Maybe my brother? He could have snuck in quietly and tried to hide with me. That sounded like something he'd do. But the thought flickered just as quickly. What if it was my sister? What if she found her way up here and was just trying to scare me into revealing myself? Either way, I wasn't about to speak up and give away my position. I stayed still, quiet, just waited for the last seconds to tick by. A few moments later, my pocket timer began to beep. 5 minutes. I smiled a little in the dark and called out loud and clear, "We win!" But the sound of crumpling plastic didn't stop. In fact, it did. And then nothing. Just this thick, uncomfortable silence. A silence that settled over everything like a heavy blanket. No reply, no laughter, no footsteps, just stillness. Someone was definitely trying to mess with me now. I was sure of it. I rolled my eyes and slowly crawled toward the attic door, reaching out to pull the string for the closet light below. The moment the light snapped on, it cut through the dark like a knife, and in that brief glow spilling up through the opening, I saw it. Just to my left, behind a stack of old boxes, the top of a head ducked quickly out of sight. Short hair. That had to be my brother. Grinning, I called out his name in a mocking tone, dragging it out like a tease as I started making my way over toward the stack of boxes. "Very funny, dude," I said, half laughing. "You almost got me." But something deep inside my chest didn't feel like laughing. I crept closer to the wall of boxes, keeping my voice light and teasing. I was planning to jump over and give my brother a scare of his own, payback for trying to mess with me. My heart was still racing from the bag sound and the surprise glimpse of his head, but I figured it would all end in laughter. I took a breath, crouched slightly, preparing to leap over the stack. But I wasn't the one doing the scaring. Right as I approached, someone stood up from behind the boxes. Only it wasn't my brother. It was a full-grown man. He rose slowly, his head emerging into full view first, followed by his shoulders, then the rest of him. His face was pale, almost sickly under the faint light, and completely unfamiliar. He lifted one finger to his lips and whispered, calm and chilling, "Don't freak out." But I did exactly that. The sound that escaped me was nothing short of a scream, high-pitched and panicked, like a terrified child. My breath caught, my limbs went cold, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care what was behind me. I scrambled out of the attic so fast I almost fell through the opening. As I hit the floor of the closet, I half crawled, half sprinted toward the hallway. I could sense him at the attic door, following, but he stopped there. He didn't chase me down the stairs. He just stood there, watching, waiting. I burst into the living room where my brother and sister were already hanging out, catching their breath after the round. I didn't waste a second. "Run!" I shouted. "There's someone in the attic! A man! A real man!" I don't know if it was the look on my face or the sheer panic in my voice, but they didn't question it, not for a second. I think they even heard something, maybe the faint movement above us. Either way, they ran.
We bolted straight out the front door, bare feet slopping the pavement, and didn't stop until we reached our neighbor's house 2 doors down. We banged on the door until they answered, wide-eyed and startled, and we practically fell inside trying to explain what had happened. They called the police, then they called our parents. I know it sounds like a cliché ending, but the cops did show up. And like these stories always go, the attic was empty. No man, no trace. Just a few scattered boxes and a black trash bag that no one remembered putting up there. The police searched the house top to bottom. Nothing. Unfortunately, that meant I could never prove to anyone what I saw. Not really. Not to my parents, not to the officers, not even fully to my brother and sister, though I think deep down they knew I wasn't lying. All I can tell you is this. It happened. There was someone in the attic that day, and I've never played hide and seek since.